Everyone, welcome, welcome. We're going to give it just a few moments here for folks to get settled. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know we're coming right up to the holidays, so thank you for still making time for the AACRAO's GR team. We really appreciate you guys joining us. I want to start with just a few kind of general reminders. I know we've all been doing Zoom for a while now, but just some ground rules for us. We will be having some time at the end for questions, so please feel free to put those in the chat as during the presentation, but we'll also try to open up the floor at the end if folks would like to, we'll call on some folks to unmute themselves and ask their question if they'd like. That brings me to a second one as a reminder. So you do have the ability to unmute yourselves. Please, though, stay muted unless you've been called upon. And again, there'll be that time at the end for you to ask questions. And lastly, the recording of this webinar, this is being recorded. That recording will be available to folks on the same page that you went to register within 24 hours after the session ends. So dropping a link in the chat right there, that's the page that you can go to after this webinar is concluded to view the recording. And with that, I wanted to start off by introducing, we have William Gill here, our Senior Director of Government Relations for AACRAO's team.
Well, thanks, Mike. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for everyone for taking time out of your busy shopping holiday time to join us for this fantastic information session. Happy holidays. Thank you for joining us for a brand new feature, which we're having here at AACRAO, which is our quarterly reports kind of from Washington, D.C., where we really want to have an interactive engagement with our members of kind of what we're hearing here in Washington, D.C., and be able to answer any questions that you may have from your home institution. But first, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Mike Bilfinger, the Assistant Director of Public Policy for AACRAO, and also Faith Farley, our amazing intern who is at GW University, who's also going to be participating and providing some input today. But before we, the first thing we want to talk about is, I know we all want to talk about the incoming administration and what that will mean for higher education. But before we get to that, I want to turn over to Mike because he's been tracking a lot of the things that the current administration has been trying to close out. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity for Mike. What do you think are some of the things that individuals should still be keeping an eye on before we change administrations?
Thank you, Bill. So I'm sure big one that is probably on a lot of your minds already, that's financial value transparency and gainful employment. That's kind of the big issue that's coming up. So the new administration new president comes in on January 20th. That reporting deadline is January 15th, so right before the change administration. We have been closely watching and listening with the higher education community to all the concerns in meeting this regulation, right? Being able to provide accurate and timely data to the departments that the metrics that they produce are meaningful, right? Are actually valid metrics. So to that end, we've been busy sending community letters and engaging with the department. We sent a community letter last week along with our sister associations. That letter got picked up by Politico Pro and Inside Higher Ed. So it was encouraging to see the media kind of picking up on the traction and the importance of this issue for our community. Prior to that, on December 2nd, we sent a letter, our own personal letter to the department sharing the concerns that we're hearing, asking for a delay of that January 15th deadline. And even as far back as November, we had sent a letter to the department expressing some of the initial concerns we're hearing.
Mike, let me jump in real quickly. That letter wasn't just sent to the department, the AACRAO letter, right? That was also sent to members of Congress.
Correct. So we also sent that to all members of the House Education and Workforce Committee and the Senate Help Committee, along with all the staff there. So we're pulling all the strings we can to try to get the message out and share what we're hearing on the ground. Because I don't need to tell you guys, but there's a lot of concern about how do we get timely, accurate information to the department by this deadline, especially given kind of the history around this, it being repealed when there was a change in administration or being challenged, these flip-flops. So we know there's a lot of trepidation in the community about this. Last thing I'll mention on that is just that AACRAO, we recently hosted a webinar with the Association for Institutional Research, AIR, as well as the National Student Clearinghouse about that webinar was focused specifically on FETGE. If you guys missed that session, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. You can go to that page and you can view a recording of that and also the slide deck in case you want to know a little bit more in depth about the regulations and what might be happening with that. Beyond FETGE, another big issue we've been tracking at the end of the Biden administration is distance education regulations. So there hasn't been, it's likely not going to be finalized before the change administration, but we expect that this isn't an issue that's going away, that this is going to be still relevant and a priority moving into the next administration. So those distance education regulations that have been proposed, they do a number of things that are of concern to the community. They require attendance taking for all distance ed courses. And attendance here is not just a simple roll call. Attendance means substantive and regular interaction. So taking a test or submitting an assignment. And if a student doesn't have that regular substantive interaction, institutions are required to automatically withdraw that student within 14 days of no interaction. So you can imagine in a graduate course or any course where you really just have your final at the end or maybe just your midterm, but there's not a whole lot of assignments or check-in points throughout the semester, it's very plausible that you would have 14 days without an assignment, without a quiz. That student might be withdrawn by the institution simply because there wasn't that check-in point, but that doesn't mean the student wasn't engaged. They weren't learning in the classroom, right? The proposed regulations, they also would disallow students who are taking asynchronous clock hour programs from using federal financial aid. So not that the programs would go away, but those students wouldn't have access to Title IV funding as opposed to if they were taking a synchronous class. And there's also some worrying requirements about data collection, for instance, about the way that it classifies distance education courses and additional locations, we think would cause some redundancy in the data that the department's going to get and likely affect the validity of any kind of outcome data that they end up drawing from those. So that's the kind of regulation side. The last big thing that we're tracking as the Biden administration comes to a close here is the question of what's going to be subject to the Congressional Review Act. That's the CRA. It's just as real quick, the CRA, requires federal agencies to submit final rules to Congress and the Government Accountability Office prior to those rules taking effect. Congress then has the opportunity to pass a joint resolution of disapproval within a certain time frame of that being submitted. And if this passes with the same threshold as voting on a bill, that would prevent the final rule from going into effect. When there's a big change, there's a change in administration or a shift in majority control like we're seeing this time around, the CRA has in the past kind of been weaponized to block any of the previous administration's regulations that the incoming administration doesn't agree with. So we don't know yet how the chips will fall at the end of the day, what will be subject to the CRA, but we're closely watching, for instance, the SAVE Act, that repayment plan. There's a lot of suspicion that Trump will use the CRA to block that, or student loan forgiveness programs that Biden rolled out. Trump may move to use the CRA to block those as well.
Thanks, Mike. Those are the things that we're absolutely keeping tabs on as this administration is closing. But as we move to the new Congress, there seems to be obviously some changes. And Faith, can you bring us up to speed on some of the things that we already know that are going to be some changes within the new Congress?
Of course, Bill. Thank you so much. So moving forward, we're going to be seeing some changes in leadership on both the Senate and the House sides of Congress, as Republicans have taken control of both chambers. On the Senate, we're going to see Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana chairing the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, also known as the HELP Committee. He's previously served as ranking member and has been experienced in this committee. As far as his priorities go, he's a big proponent of the College Transparency Act, also known as the CTA. This act is intended to increase transparency regarding student outcomes from higher education, including projected income for graduated students and student success rates. AACRAO does have some concerns with this since it proposes the creation of a post-secondary student database. Obviously, there's some concerns regarding student privacy and FERPA regulations, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that moving forward. The CTA is bicameral and bipartisan, so we're definitely expecting Senator Cassidy to utilize his new position to push for this legislation moving forward. On the House side, Tim Walberg has been elected the chair of the House Education and Workforce Committee. He previously challenged Rep. Fox in the last Congress and lost, so we're going to be seeing him move forward with his own agenda. He's served on the committee for 16 years and is incredibly experienced in the education realm. As far as his priorities go, he's declared that he'll be focusing on increasing school choice, focused on making college more affordable, and increasing access to internship and mentorship programs for students. Representative Fox will remain on the House Education and Workforce Committee, but will not serve as chair this upcoming session.
Thanks, Faith. So beyond the committee leaderships, I know we also are going to be seeing a change in leadership of the Department of Education itself. Can you speak a little bit about what some of our expectations are for the Linda McMahon, Trump's nominee for secretary?
Of course. Thank you so much for that, Mike. So as I'm sure everybody's heard by now, Linda McMahon has been nominated for Secretary of Education. She formerly served as Small Business Administration Director under the Trump administration. As far as her priorities in this position, we're likely going to see a push from the entire administration towards apprenticeships and more non-traditional credential pathways for students. We think that there'll be increased support for learner and employment records. And she's also a large proponent of the short-term Pell, since these can be applied to these more non-traditional pathways that we've seen the administration focusing on. Short-term Pell is bipartisan and bicameral, and we've seen it brought up in a lot of large legislation in the past. So, Bill, I did kind of have a question about this. I was hoping you could expand upon it. Since short-term Pell is so broadly supported, it's bipartisan, it's bicameral, why haven't we seen any movement on this legislation in the past?
So the issue is, it was brought up, as probably many of you know, it is a bicameral, bipartisan supported concept. The issue is always when it starts getting into the details of all the nitty gritty, specifically how it's going to be paid for. In the current Congress, I should say, it was brought up by committee of the and workforce. It passed out of committee, and then by a bipartisan vote, it was brought up for a full House vote, but at the last, under the suspension of the rules, which means that you require 2/3 of all the House members to support it. And it was pulled at the last minute because higher ed had some tremendous concerns in how they were going to pay for it. And we didn't think it was going to be fair, even though some folks said, well, we'll just take care of it in the Senate. Higher ed didn't feel comfortable. So we put lots of pressure, and at the last minute, it was pulled from the suspension of the rules. The Senate has not moved on it, even though, again, there is bipartisan support for the concept.
Sorry, what's happening? Where?
I'm sorry. Oh, again, but unfortunately, there's still disagreement in regards to who is going to be eligible to be able to utilize these funds. Specifically, there's a disagreement on for-profits being able to utilize those funds, and some Democratic senators have already said that they would kill the bill in its current format. So while we're seeing a lot of movement in this space, I think that we will see a lot more movement in the next Congress, and we'll probably see some form of short-term Pell, considering that it is a priority of both Mr. Walberg that's coming in and the administration for short-term credentials, and I think and pathways. And so I think we'll see some kind of movement on this, which will impact obviously registrars and reporting mechanisms, and conversations we've had with the clearinghouse. They were already kind of planning for that to really go into effect, not in 2025, but actually in essence in 2026 for reporting mechanisms. So that's kind of where we are with short-term Pell. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure we'll come back to that later on.
Beyond McMahon, some of the changes that we're seeing in the committee leadership and Ms. McMahon's nomination to the secretary, as well as short-term Pell, what are some, for you, Bill, what are some other predictions you have for the new administration? Thinking specifically here about a lot of the rhetoric we heard on the campaign trail. Is the Department of Ed even going to exist next year? What's happening? We've heard a lot of talk out there.
And that was a lot of the conversation that was transpiring on the campaign trail, the dismantling of the Department of Ed, and I know that caused a lot of concern within the higher education community. It's difficult to build a department. It's just as difficult to dismantle a department. So let me just say that in order for that to be achieved, there has to be tremendous procedural votes. It would also require congressional approval. And just so put in perspective, last time such a measure was brought down to the House floor, it wasn't ever even brought up to the Senate, was there was overwhelmingly there were many Republicans that actually did not support the dismantling, so it wasn't even approved. So it's going to be very, very, very difficult for even the dismantling of the Department of Education. So I just want to put that out there. I think it's important. It was a great talking piece during the campaign, but I think in reality, it's one of those very, very, very difficult issues that are really going to come to reality. And to be honest with you, Mike, we're all kind of like, all of us in the higher education community here in Washington, D.C., and basically across the entire United States, all of us are looking into our magic crystal balls, trying to figure out what's going to come next. What is going to happen with this new administration? But nobody really knows. We can all speculate, but this is what we really do know. We know that higher ed is fighting the impression that higher ed is moving society in the wrong direction. That is a narrative that we have been hearing for a while. It's really coming from the two areas, really the value proposition, which I'm sure many of you have heard over and over, is also the college cost issue. And so those are two, excuse me, I've got a cough, perception and challenges that higher education has a whole. We're definitely surely going to experience increased oversight and regulations in the new administration. We're certainly going to see increased oversight over civil rights, over free speech. The issue of anti-Semitism on campus is not going to go away anytime soon. Excuse me. The FAFSA rollout and what transpired with the FAFSA rollout last time is still lingering. Now, the department has done a tremendous job in fixing many of the issues that were associated with the rollout. According to everything, the rollout that came out on December 1st has been very successful. AACRAO is part of a coalition of higher education associations that receives updates, and we're having another meeting with the White House and Department of Ed in regards to the latest FAFSA rollout. So that is definitely going to play into the situation. Also, it's been changed. Historically, it was the mandated rollout date was December 1st. Historically, it was always rolled out on October 1st. And it has now been codified that FAFSA must be rolled out by October 1st of every year. So the Department of Education has now a new mandate that it must roll out FAFSA by October 1st of every year. We also have the situation on immigration. In regards to specifically on international students, some of the things that we are hearing is that they could possibly reduce the number of international student enrollment. They might even incorporate some caps into international student enrollment, specifically focusing on China and some of the countries that were under the travel ban under the first Trump administration. And then we still don't know really what the impact is going to be on DACA and Dreamers. And so there's a lot of speculation surrounding all that. Possible questions could be raised in the Department of Office of Civil Rights that we have heard is, you know, is Office of Civil Rights really needed? Could that responsibility be transferred over to Department of Justice? Is student financial aid and programs really needed at Department of Education? Could that be transferred over to the Department of Treasury? We think that that's not a good idea. AACRAO does, and as well as a higher education. I think they have different missions, and I think they could get lost in the shuffle. There's a reason why there's an Office of Civil Rights and a specific Office of Financial Aid over at the Department of Education, and they weren't originally housed in those various other agencies, and we would like to see them kept that way. But one thing is for sure that we know is that funding will likely go down in the Trump administration. And during the 4 years during the Trump administration, every year when the OMB rolled out or the president's budget rolled out, there was always a decrease of funding about, anywhere about 10 to 13 to 15% in decrease in funding. But obviously, all the president does is propose, but Congress actually enacts. And so by the time that the Department of Education funding was completed at the end of the fiscal year, it always either was the same or actually increased. But we know that now that you have the trifecta of the House, the Senate, and the administration together, we probably will see some reduced funding at Department of Education, but not only in the Department of Education. We also foresee some decreased funding in some of the agencies that do science agencies such as NIH, NSF, CDC. The overall goal is to really minimize the footprint of education within the federal government. And I think that is one of the major goals that we have heard from the incoming administration and will probably seek to try to incorporate during their term. The other aspect that I thought is important to point out is funding for minority serving institutions. During the first Trump administration, we heard tremendous support for HBCUs. We expect that to continue under this Trump administration, as well as TCUs. The question of funding really surrounds Hispanic serving institutions, or HSIs, and there's concern that the administration could try to cut funding for Title V and Title III programs, which are capacity building funds for Hispanic serving institutions. But we are obviously keeping a close eye on that and working with our colleagues at HACU and other minority MSIs representing organizations to try to work collaboratively to ensure that that does not transpire.
Oh, everyone need to take a breath after that, right? That was a mouthful.
I'm just full of, I bring so much good cheer. That's why it's called Merry Christmas.
Right. No, of course. Well, I know that was a lot, but that was really just the level setting here. Looking on the regulatory side of things, so we're first going to look regulations, and then we're going to move to the legislative side. So on the regulatory side, what are some of the specific issues that AACRAO's government relations team has been tracking in regards to the incoming Trump administration, right? We just went through kind of some of our predictions, what we do know will likely come to fruition. What are the specifics now?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the Title IX regulations under the new administration are going to look very different than what they were under the Biden administration. There was obviously, injunctions against the implementation of the Title IX regulations under the Biden administration. I think those are going to probably be dropped under the incoming administration for fighting him, and they're probably going to develop their own set of Title IX regs. I also think that there's going to be an increased scrutiny on DEI programs. And there's even talk, and there's rumors, these are not, please don't take this to the bank or anything like that. There's rumors that Department of Education may maybe utilize Office of Civil Rights, maybe utilize as a tool to go after some states. So specifically, the issue that OCR may utilize, that they argue that some states have created discriminatory practice against other groups of students. So put it in perspective, some states have anti-DEI versus non-anti-DEI states. A possible strategy could be to focus on the admissions processes of 5 or 10 high-profile institutions and go after them kind of hard, with the goal of having the rest of the higher education community kind of fall in line with some of the final rulings that may come out of that. All that is simply speculation, but there is that kind of rumor mill. And be honest with you, I love a transition from one administration to the other, especially from one party to the other, because all you do is get a lot of rumor mill. And so all this is just fun speculation. That's all it is fun. Until we see pen to paper or, some printing, anything like that, that's all this is just simple speculation. So, and this one is absolutely speculation as well. Now, I did read in regards to immigration that incoming President Trump would like to do an executive order, essentially trying to go after the 14th Amendment, which would state that would strip citizenship of individuals born in the U.S. from non-legal individuals, which goes straight to the 14th Amendment. And I think the goal of the administration would be to try to take that up to the Supreme Court and test the 14th Amendment. Obviously, there's a tons of hurdles associated with that. I mentioned earlier travel ban, and we've also talked about deportations. So I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of worrisome within the immigrant and migrant communities in regards to what the implementation is this going to be, especially students that are currently enrolled in higher education. And so we are obviously keeping vigilant on anything that transpires around that. And the final thing that I would talk about, the regulatory side, is accreditation. I think that the incoming president has made it pretty clear that he believes that accreditors are individual cartels, that they are too strong of a gatekeepers, and some of the ideas have been floated of is possibly even creating, perhaps considering to move accreditations to the states, thereby creating 50 different accreditors. Again, this is just things that we have heard, and again, this is not part of the AACRAO space, but this is Cheetah space, obviously, but it's something that would impact higher education institutions and especially the accreditation process.
What about on the legislative side? So moving over, what are some of the issues that AACRAO's GR team has been tracking legislatively in relation to the new administration?
So I think There's lots of things, as I've kind of mentioned, that we're all in higher ed kind of tracking and measuring and trying to figure out how it's all going to fall and all that kind of stuff. But I did want to take the opportunity to focus on one piece of legislation, which is some may recognize it, some may not. It came and went, but it's still got legs. It's something called the College Cost Reduction Act. The College Cost Reduction Act was introduced by Representative Fox in the Ed and Workforce Committee. And it passed on a strictly party line vote, and went down to the floor, and it did not pass the floor, and it did not pass by 4 votes. So there were some detractors from the majority that did not support it. Notwithstanding, I do believe that it's probably going to be a template for discussion for higher education, probably in the next Congress. And I should be clear that there was absolutely no action, not even a thought of taking CCRA up in the Senate side. So talk a little bit about why CCRA is important for higher education, not only from a policy perspective, but from an implementation perspective. So like all large pieces of legislation, and has some good things, some things that AACRAO and most higher educations would support. For example, it includes legislation that we have championed and advocated for and help, get sponsors for. It includes reverse transfer legislation. It would double Pell Grant for juniors and seniors who are on track for graduating on time and enrolled in bachelor degree programs with a high return on investment. It repeals gainful employment and financial value transparency regulations. It prevents interest from capitalizing on student loans and simplifies student loan repayment processes, and would require students to only pay back what they would have owed on a 10-year standard to not own repayment plan. And so those are the good things. The cons, I think, from a higher education perspective, outweigh the pluses. And so, for example, it would eliminate the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant Program. It would eliminate the PLUS program for graduate students. It would change the overall need analysis formula with worrisome impacts for low-income students. It makes institutions responsible for loans that former students don't pay off. Can I say that again? Would make institutions responsible for loans that former students don't pay off. It would repeal the 90-10 rule. For those that are not familiar with the 90-10 rule, there's currently regulations in place that mandate that an institution cannot receive more than 90% of federal funding in order to exist. So it would repeal that rule, therefore making it eligible for institutions to receive 100% of federal funding in order to maintain its doors open. It would establish loan caps of $73,000 for undergraduate, $100,000 for graduate, and $150,000 for professional students. And that would be, doctors, lawyers, everything underneath the sun, $150,000 cap. And here's the other kicker. It also includes a risk sharing proposal. Under this risk sharing proposal, some of our sister associations have estimated that 86% of all higher education institutions would be required to make an annual repayment back to Department of Education. It would create the secondary student education data platform mentioned before, and it also impact accreditation significantly. So in accreditation, It would allow industry-specific assurance entity to be approved and designated as an accreditor by the state. It would allow institutions of higher education to have dual accreditation, amongst other things. So there's a lot of things that could be impacted by the CCRA. But most importantly, it would be part of, which I haven't touched base on, and it's going to be one of the priorities of the incoming administration, is going to be the tax cuts. It's the renewal of the tax cuts. And the way that the tax cuts were done last time was through a reconciliation process, which is a, for lack of another term, kind of an archaic methodology in order to get around some of the current existing rules. The reconciliation process is it would go back to the House, so it would pass the House on a majority vote on 50+1, right? And it would go to the Senate. The Senate, under normal rules, would have to meet a 60-vote threshold in order to meet not have the filibuster. Well, reconciliation allows them to go around that since it's specifically tied to taxes. Since it's tied to taxes, it must have offsets. And so, just so you know, in background, reconciliation was utilized in order to pass the Affordable Care Act, and also used to pass the first tax cuts of the Trump administration. I mention this because CCRA has been scored to save the federal government $185 billion over the next 10 years. So if you are looking to renew the tax cuts and you are looking to offset those tax cuts with offsets in different departments, and you already have a legislation that came close to passing on the floor, 4 votes short, that would automatically save you $185 billion. That is a really good way to start to look how to get some of your tax cuts passed by the incoming administration. So that's why I highlighted CCRA, not only for its policy, but also for it's a vehicle for tax cuts. I'm sorry for this cough. And I don't want to take any water because it seems to get it worse. So I thought that's kind of the stuff that we are seeing here in Washington, D.C. But we did want to kind of stop it there and open it up for folks to kind of ask any questions, and hopefully we can provide some insight and be able to answer some of the questions.
I'm just going to share a link I put in the chat. This is the American Council on Education. They did an analysis of the CCRA. So that's where, when Bill referenced that 86% of institutions would be making a risk-sharing agreement, that's where we're getting that from. And you can also see some other stats there, like 62% of institutions would see an overall net loss as a result of the bill. It does create this new plus grant or promise grant. Only 27% of institutions would even be eligible to receive that. And this ACE's analysis aligns with what the Congressional Business Office found as well from the bill. So if you're curious to dig into it a little more, I shared that resource as well.
Thanks, Mike. Now that we've completely depressed everybody, I will say that, Rome is not burning. There's still going to be a Department of Education. There's still going to be lots of opportunity for dialogue. These are just starting points. As I always often say, democracy is not perfect. It was created specifically that way. As Winston Churchill used to say, compromise is when nobody gets compromise is making sure that nobody gets everything that they want.
feel free to come off mute or to put questions in the chat. We're hoping to make this kind of a quarterly series but very informal, right? A space for us to share some updates for you guys, but also for us to hear from you, right? Is it FETGE that's of most concern? Are you guys really concerned about changes to accreditation? What questions do you have? Clarifications do you need? This, we're hoping, becomes a space for both of us to kind of interact and share. We'll share updates from our side and listen to you guys. What is it that is concern to you as the practitioners?
Mr. Baus has a good everyone's trying to absorb everything.
Bill, yeah. Bill, I think it's just everybody's just trying to get their own crystal ball through your crystal ball, and everybody else's that we just don't know what's going to shake out. And you're just kind of if you're running some kind of higher ed legislative sports book, what's going to happen in the new year and beyond. Yeah, boy, a lot of different things there, and of course, I mean, we, like everybody else, are hot and heavy and working on all the FVT, GE stuff, financial aid right now too.
Bill, is there anything that you can share? We have one question. Do we anticipate a change to the FET-GE reporting deadline? I know we've signed on to community letters. We've sent our own asking for that delay, but is there you're clued in much more behind the scenes than I am. Anything that you can share with folks, conversations you've been having behind closed doors?
I guess, we keep pushing pretty hard on both members of Congress and Department of Education. I would only encourage as many institutions to write their members of Congress, especially if they sit on the Help Committee and on the Education and Workforce Committee, to encourage their presidents to write letters on behalf of the institutions to make sure that they are clear that their institution and their district or their states are impacted, and this is bad, and that January 15th is not a good date. So this is where we can only do so much from here, but this is where your voices are going to be louder than ours.
We also got another question in the chat asking about the online attendance and the ultimate withdrawal as a proposal. I believe this was in reference to the distance education regulations, Ashley. But feel free to pipe up if I'm misinterpreting there.
Yes, that's correct. I just wanted to make sure I heard you say it was a proposal and wasn't something we should be enforcing at this time.
It is proposed. We're waiting for the final regs. Yeah, we've submitted. There was a comment period. Sorry, Bill. Looks like you're chomping on the bit. I'll let you go.
No, I meant, so actually, you're absolutely correct. Those were draft regs. There was an open comment period. AACRAO, higher ed, many other associations provided their comments. There was thought that the final regs would actually come out maybe late November, in order for them not to be part of the Congressional Review Act. But if they come out at this juncture, they would be part of the Congressional Review Act. So that's the silver lining in that regard. But we have not heard anything. But yes, no final regs have come out for implementation. And as we can see with GE and Financial Valley transparency, there's always opportunity to try to make changes. But no, nothing permanent right now. Silver lining. Thanks, Erica. I think we're all concerned about GE FVT deadlines. I would encourage every president to send a letter to their congressman and then CC, especially if they have, even if their member of Congress does not sit on the Education and Workforce Committee, but they have a state representative from their state that sits on there. Send them, it's addressed to their member, CC that other member of Congress, that sits on the Ed and Workforce Committee, so they are aware of how this would impact their state.
And I just put in the chat, again, a link to our previous webinar. It has we had a member of AIR come on and the National Student Clearinghouse to walk through their reporting platform and some of the regulations in general. So if you're still have some questions about what do I need to report? What is the completers list? What is I still am having issues with my banner system is not cooperating with what the NSC is returning to me. A lot of those questions were addressed in that webinar, and there's a recording available there, as well as that the slide deck that we used for that. But otherwise, if there's no further questions, I know we're still a little soon before the 3 o'clock cutoff, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
And again, this is a new kind of program that we plan to do on a quarterly basis, myself, Mike, and Faith, and just to kind of provide an update and have a free-flowing discussion of what we know and what we think are the pressing issues that we are hearing here, that'll impact all your institutions, and be able to answer as many questions as we possibly can.
If any questions do come up after we end the call and suddenly, oh, that one that was burning on my mind, but I couldn't remember it now comes back, feel free to send an email to gr@acro.org. Or we also have AACRAO Exchange. There's an advocacy exchange in there. Feel free to drop any questions or share concerns that you might be having. The exchange can be a great resource for you guys as fellow practitioners to share best practices. How have you been dealing with some common problems you're experiencing? There's a lot of power in community, and that's a great place to enjoy that.
Well, thank you. You're all very welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking time out of your holiday breaks. Thank you for your holiday shopping. We hope that this was helpful. And again, we wish everybody a happy holiday and a brand new year. And we look forward to continued engagement with everybody. So thank you very much. We're here to serve all of you. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Faith. Have great
Of
holidays.
course, you're welcome. Have a good one, guys.